everyone. My name is Kajsa Resare Sahlin, and I'm a PhD student at the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is part of Stockholm University. And last year, I wrote a chapter in this report about Nordic food transition, featuring a farm in Sweden called Sjo holm, which has participated in the Swedish part of the Uniseco EU project. And we followed this farm during a part of their transition to a more sustainable beef production. And this is a nice segue from the previous presentation, that we all know that beef has some major sustainability challenges. So we basically wanted to study how this farm could be an example of realizing less but better meat production, and the kind of implications that has. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the Uniseco project and give you a little bit of an overview of the Sjo holm farm. And then I'm going to spend most of my time talking about a recent study featuring this farm, which we are just about to have published. And it focuses on less but better meat production and the kind of sustainability implications that this has. So the Uniseco project was a 3-year Horizon 2020 project, which finished in May this year. And it gathered a very wide range of stakeholders and experts from science and policy and practice from 15 different EU member states, or former member states in some cases. And the project focused on the use of agroecological methods for improving the sustainability of EU farming. And in each of the participating countries, there was a case study including about 10 farms and farmers, which actually implemented a range of different sustainability measures, which were then evaluated in collaboration with researchers in each of these countries. And the aim of this was to provide real-world policy advice on how to use agroecological methods to actually improve sustainability of kind of across the wide range of realities of farming that we see in Europe. So just as an example, we had everything from peach production in Greece to grass-based dairy production in Lithuania. And one of these, one of these cases was the Swedish case study, which was led by Professor Elin Rös at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And we gathered 10 farmers who were spread out across the whole country. And together with them, also together with representatives from the whole food value chain here in Sweden, we wanted to investigate the challenges and opportunities that these farmers faced to actually diversify their specialized livestock farms to also include more crops for direct human consumption, while also integrating a range of measures to actually improve sustainability performance. And one of these farms was Sjo holm farm. And Sjo holm is quite a large farm located in the central eastern part of Sweden. They manage around 500 hectares of arable land and about 200 hectares of very biodiversity-rich semi-natural pastures. And they signed up for the Uniseco project because they had started a very large rearrangement of how their farm was being managed. And they were interested in understanding better and actually being able to tell if they were moving in a more sustainable direction or not. So historically, and up until 2017, when they basically started the rearrangement, the farm was an intensive beef farm, rearing 1,200 intact bulls in an indoor system. And they fed mostly purchased concentrate feed. And they also had quite an intensive conventional cropping that delivered cereal for food, feed, and also biofuel production. And then in 2018, they started their kind of sustainability journey towards a completely different production system, which we have called the more extensive system. And today, as we speak, they rear 350 heifers completely on grass. So the cattle graze biodiversity-rich semi-natural pastures for about 6 months of the year. And then in the winter, they are kept in loose indoor housing system, and they're fed silage or grass clover lay that is grown on their farm. So the beef is nowadays 100% grass-fed. And the cropping system is organic, and they still deliver cereal for both food and feed. So we were, of course, super interested in understanding the kind of sustainability effects that we could see from such an all-encompassing rearrangement of the management of such a large farm. And we've analyzed this using a mix of different tools and methods. And that's basically what we've done in this study that we're in the final stages of. So one of the tools that we used for this sustainability assessment is something called the Smart Farm tool. And it builds on the FAO principles for sustainable farming and sustainable agriculture. And it uses around 350 different indicators to evaluate the sustainability performance across 21 sustainability themes and 58 sub-themes. So it's basically a tool that you can use to get a more holistic understanding of what more sustainable means across social aspects, economic aspects, ecological aspects, and also governance related aspects. So what you see in this radar graph here is the results that we got out from the first year, which is the intensive system, and then for the second year, which is the more extensive system. And it's quite evident here that they've made sustainability gains that are very significant in a range of different areas. And we actually saw positive development in 19 out of 21 themes, and one theme remained unchanged. And then we saw negative development in one theme. So for example, we see significant improvements in animal welfare, impacts on biodiversity, for human health and well-being, and also for quality products and information. And the one aspect where we saw a negative development was actually local economy, because the extensive system is quite a downsized farming system compared to their more intensive system, which also means that they employ much fewer people, which is, of course, negative then from a rural economic kind of perspective. We also calculated the climate impact, both at product and for the whole beef production. And since they went from a very intensive production system to a grass-based extensive system, we expected to see this increase in carbon footprint per kilo beef. And this is also what we found, that it increased from 24 kilos per kilo beef to 34 kilos. And that's simply because the animals live longer and are longer on the farm. But what's also interesting is that we calculated the climate impact for the whole beef production. And there we actually see a very significant reduction of the total emissions coming out of the farm. The total emissions actually reduced by around 70%. And most of that is thanks to the fact that they have a much smaller cattle herd within their extensive system compared to their intensive beef production system. So I think, and this result really highlights the importance of when you see a carbon footprint and you see that increase from 24 to 32 kilos, you kind of immediately think that this beef is worse from a climate perspective. But then when you also see it for the whole beef production system, you realize that you can actually have a beef production system that's more sustainable from a range of different areas, for example, animal welfare and biodiversity, but that's actually better also for climate, since the total emissions are reduced significantly thanks to the fact that they have fewer animals on their farm. One thing that wasn't in the report, because it wasn't ready at the time when we wrote that chapter, was the economic analysis that we did of the economic effects of the transition at the farm. And we used indicators from the European Farm Accountancy Data Network, or the FADN. And this is a lot of information, so you don't have to see all of this, but you can perhaps focus on the bits that are in the red squares there. And one very clear thing that we found was that the downsizing of the transition at the farm meant a very significant downsizing of the economic activity on the farm, which means that basically the business is just smaller. And we also see that in the two top figures there for the net value added and the net farm income, which are indicators of basically how much value the farm is creating in monetary terms. But what's perhaps interesting is that despite the fact that they have a much smaller business, the labor productivity, which is the productivity per worker, actually increased by 18%, which basically is a way of saying that the workers on the farm are actually creating more value with their time. And another interesting finding that we found for this farm is the right larger square that you see there, which are the gross margins, both for crops and for finishing cattle. And we found that the transition led to a positive development for nearly all outputs from the farm, except for barley here, which you see a negative development. And these figures basically means that for all of the things that the farm deliver, they basically have better economic margins. And that's mostly driven by the fact that they have much lower costs within their organic system, rather than the fact that they also have lower revenues within their organic system, where the yields are much lower. However,
coming towards an end.
All right. As you can see on the bottom red square there is that the output to input ratio has dropped below 1 for their more extensive system, which is not sustainable long term. But it basically means that that the ends aren't completely meeting financially within this system. And to that, we can basically only say that these figures are snapshots of 2 particular years, and we do see quite a significant impact from the kind of conditions that are happening within this particular year. So for example, in terms of prices or different market conditions. And for the extensive system, when this farm was still in transition to being organically certified, that had impact on how they could sell their crops, which also had quite significant economic impacts. But it tells you something about the fact that it takes a long time to kind of realize this transition and to find a financial system on a farm that actually is long-term sustainable. I'll skip this to but basically, what does this all tell us? Well, in short, we found that the extensive system on Sjo holm farm is overall a more sustainable form of production, both, for example, in terms of emissions and impacts on biodiversity, animal welfare, and also for a range of social and economic aspects. And many of these sustainability gains actually rely on the fact that the cattle herd is much smaller within the extensive system, and that it's actually adapted to the available land and resources that they have on this farm. And as such, Sjo holm is actually an example of less but better meat production, as in a less and more sustainable form of meat production. But one thing also is that in order to fully realize all of these gains, involvement from actors across the value chain is very much needed, both in terms of balancing consumption to this more downsized and more sustainable form of meat production, but also that buyers and actors across the value chain need to be involved and actually purchase these more sustainable products. So that's it for me. Thanks a lot for listening. If you have any questions, that's my email right there, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.